As Judaism is based on the public revelation at Sinai, when the Torah was given to the Jewish people and we were first proclaimed as a Jewish nation, as we read about in this week's portion, it's worthwhile taking a good look at what really transpired in that moment. As God spoke the Ten Commandments more than 3,300 years ago, there was this tremendous explosion, a theophany, if you will, that took place. Each of our ancestors were there present at this national revelation. In fact, tradition tells us the souls of all the future generations of every Jew throughout the course of history, from the beginning of time until the end of time as we might know it, were all present in that moment at the giving of the Torah at Sinai. The question, however, is this: what was the all-defining characteristic that transpired at that initial moment in time? Is it the fact that God spoke, or is it the message that God gave us? It occurs to me that it was very much the revelation itself, because if you take away one from the other, what would be the more important aspect? Is it the fact that God is speaking to us, but not necessarily knowing the content? Or is it knowing the message, but not necessarily knowing that it comes from God? As a people, is it more important that we have a very interesting message, or is it the fact that God spoke to us, which essentially then gives credence to everything else and every other communication that subsequently is given to us? The opening verse of the Ten Commandments essentially encapsulates this very idea, because it says, "And God spoke all these words, saying." What does it mean, all these words? Those words are redundant. They're superfluous. Why not? And God spoke, saying. And yet, as all the commentaries point out, God spoke all these words, all the words of the Ten Commandments, as one word, which we can't properly conceptualize or even indeed begin to fathom. And then therefore begs the question, what's the point in doing that in the first instance? It's one thing when one person is communicating to me, I can hear what's being said. But when a whole bunch of people are speaking to me at once, I can't hear any of them. So why is God choosing to speak all these words, all the words of the Ten Commandments as one word, when we're not able to properly hear that message? And yet the point is that in the first instance, God wanted to do what only God can do. Indeed, relaying all the words as one word, so that we know it's real. We know that it's God speaking to us. And then thereafter, God will relay the detail, the specifics of the message, word by word as well. But that was all a necessary first step. After the Ten Commandments, the Torah tells us that the Jewish people became very afraid. They saw the sounds, they heard the sights, whatever that means, but again, representing the uniqueness of the event. And they trembled and they began to move away. Every person there was aware that they had just experienced something miraculous. They had this colossal religious experience. Have you ever bothered to consider what it would be like if God in fact spoke to you? You're sitting in your office at your computer, minding your own business, and then all of a sudden, bing, hey, John, Jason, whatever your name might be, it's God speaking to you. It sounds tantalizing in the first instance, but then you'd have to pause and you'd have to think to yourself, did that really just happen? Did God really just speak to me? Or did I just undergo a psychotic episode and I need to go ahead and get help? The point is that the experience can be so overwhelming that it can even prove somewhat counterproductive. The Jewish people at Sinai experienced God, and what was the response? They back up. They turn to Moses and they say, "You speak to us. We're not able to hear. If we're going to continue hearing from God, we might die." But Moses, from his part, pleads with them. He invites them to come in, to hear the rest of the communication from God as well. And he says, "Levilti sechato," lest like this you will not come to sin. Not because hearing the message from God is going to impede their free choice, but he wanted them to hear the details directly from God so that it would penetrate our consciousness that much more, and then we would be far less likely to in fact sin. Ultimately, of course, we know that that didn't happen. As the verse continues, nevertheless, they stood at a distance and insisted that Moshe should relay the rest to them instead. The end result, of course, from that is that however many days later, they find themselves worshiping a golden calf. You might sum up the whole Sinai experience as such. They took in the bigger picture, but they shied away from the detail. And what's fascinating about that is that nothing's changed all these years on. There are Jews, many wonderful Jews, who love the bigger picture of Judaism, but they get frustrated, or frankly, you might say fearful, when it comes to the detail. I mean, you can walk into a room and you can immediately be struck by the beauty of a Picasso or a Rembrandt. But it's the one who truly understands and scrutinizes the picture in all of its intricate detail in order to reach into the mind of the artist, to be able to better connect to the artist and really appreciate what is happening, what the artist is looking to convey in his handiwork, that is able to really embrace the message. Conversely, there are those who are punctilious in the detail of the Torah, but they miss the bigger picture. And the world today readily attests to what happens to people who are stuck in the letter of the law but ignore the spirit of the law. You can have Jews who are scrupulous in their observance. They adhere to every fine detail, but at what expense? Looking down upon those whom they consider to be lesser mortals than themselves, shunning those who don't necessarily agree with their standards, or worse. So the big picture of Judaism is Jewish identity, Jewish pride, the awareness of the fact that we are all interrelated, that we are all interdependent, responsible for one another, and that ultimately we're carved from the same mold. The detail, of course, is what you might call the nitty-gritty of Jewish observance. The purpose of the revelation at Sinai was for us to receive the bigger picture and to appreciate how all the details create the beautiful mosaic that is that bigger picture. And so the takeaway from all that is that we shouldn't be afraid when God speaks. Listen. And if you're interested in the picture and lost in the detail, then go and explore the detail. If you're stuck in the detail and miss the bigger picture, open your eyes to it. Judaism can only prove itself meaningful in this blend of both elements, taking in the bigger picture and also listening to the detail. Because if one of the two is lacking, then essentially we go lacking. So get stuck in. Shabbat Shalom.